hidden truth waiting to be exposed. Welcome to Cafe Echoes. I am your host, Silas Graves. Comment below, where is your mind at as we start this case? I can't wait to see your thoughts. The story begins. The winter sun lay pale over the lawns of Havisham Court, turning the frost to a thin silver crust that glittered like crushed glass. From the terrace, one could see the river beyond the ha-ha, moving slowly, as if it, too, had secrets it preferred not to hurry into the open. Inside, the house glowed with the confident warmth of old money, polished mahogany, soft lampshades, and portraits that watched with the mild disapproval of ancestors who had never mislaid a fork, a fortune, or a reputation. Captain Hastings would later insist that the first sign of trouble was the quiet, not the pleasant hush of a country morning, nor the dignified stillness of a great house at rest, but something tighter, like a held breath. Even the servants moved differently, their footsteps measured, their voices lowered to a conspiratorial murmur. It was, I remember, the sort of silence one hears in a drawing-room when a name is mentioned that should not be mentioned, and everyone thinks at once of the same thing. We had come, Monsieur Poirot and I, at the request of Lady Havisham herself, an invitation couched in flattering terms and edged with urgency. A small matter, she had written, a distressing domestic complication. Poirot had read the letter twice, pursed his lips, and said only, "Mon ami, when a lady of quality calls a matter small, it is because it is large enough to swallow her whole." Havisham Court was hosting a weekend gathering, to the kind that pretends to be effortless while being engineered with the precision of a military campaign. There were 10 of us besides the household, relatives, friends, one politician, one clergyman, and an artist of modern tendencies whom I did not like at all. It was, in short, a closed circle, exactly the sort that renders truth difficult and deceit convenient. Lady Havisham met us in the great hall. She was a handsome woman in her late 50s, with pearls at her throat and composure worn like armour. Only her hands betrayed her, long-fingered, elegant, and trembling just enough to be noticed by a man who noticed everything. "Monsieur Poirot," she said with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "How kind of you to come. Captain Hastings, welcome." Poirot bowed, immaculate, his moustaches perfect, and his gaze already taking the measure of every line, every shadow, every person hovering at the edges of the scene. "Madame, for you, always. But tell me, what is this complication that disturbs the harmony of your beautiful house?" Lady Havisham hesitated. That single pause, so brief, seemed to set the tone of the entire weekend. She glanced toward the staircase where a tall young man stood half in shadow, watching us with an expression carefully blank. "My nephew," she said. "Rupert. He is family, and families, have matters." Rupert Havisham descended, one hand resting lightly on the banister. He was perhaps 28, well-built, well-dressed, and possessed of the kind of good looks that make one instantly trust him, until one realizes that trusting handsome strangers is often a mistake. His eyes were grey and steady, and if he was anxious, he concealed it well. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, "I've heard of your work. I hope you'll find our little country gathering less dramatic than your usual affairs." Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah, but the countryside, monsieur, is often more dramatic. In London one expects the theatre. Here one believes in innocence." Rupert's mouth twitched, as though the remark amused him, or irritated him, or both. Behind him came another figure, Miss Celeste Arden, the modern artist, all sharp angles and sharper opinions, her dark hair cut in a severe bob that made her look perpetually dissatisfied. She glanced at Poirot as one might glance at a new painting, judging its symmetry. "So this is the famous detective," she said. "How very tidy." Poirot's eyes flicked to the smudge of paint on her cuff, the ink stain on Rupert's thumb, with the faint line of damp at Lady Havisham's sleeve where she had wiped her hands after washing them too thoroughly. He said nothing, but I felt, with that familiar prickle at the back of the neck, that he was already placing invisible pieces on an invisible board. In the drawing-room we were introduced to the rest. Sir Alistair Havisham, Lady Havisham's husband, genial and booming, with the easy arrogance of a man who has never been refused anything important. Reverend Gideon Vale, mild, polite, and watchful. Mrs. Priscilla Wren, Lady Havisham's companion, who spoke softly and listened loudly, and Mr. Lionel Brackett, a local magistrate who wore confidence like a badge. There were also two younger women, Miss Imogen Havisham, a cousin with a shy smile and eyes that darted away too quickly, and Miss Lillian Crane, a Lady Havisham's secretary, neat as a pin, her hair scraped back, her notebook always in hand, as if life itself were a dictation. It was Lillian Crane who, quite accidentally, gave me the first real shock. As she crossed the room, her notebook slipped. I bent to retrieve it and saw, on the open page, a single line written in a hurried hand. No one must know what was hidden in the East Wing. Before I could read more, Lillian snatched it up, her face flushing a violent pink. "Thank you, Captain," she said quickly. Her smile was polite, but her eyes were frightened. Poirot, of course, had seen. He had seen everything. Later, when Lady Havisham finally spoke in private, her voice dropped to a whisper that seemed to cling to the curtains. "There is something in this house," she said, "that should never have been kept. Years ago, before Rupert came of age, there was an arrangement, a secret. We thought it buried." Poirot tilted his head. "And now, madam?" Lady Havisham's composure cracked just for a moment. "Now someone means to unbury it." And at that precise instant, from somewhere above, high, sharp, and unmistakable, came a single scream. Poirot was moving before the echo of the scream had finished trembling in the rafters. I followed him up the staircase, the runner muffling our haste. A maid appeared, white as milk. "The East Wing," she gasped. "Mr. Arkwright's room." "Show us," Poirot said, and she fled ahead. The East Wing was colder, smelling of closed fires and linen. At the far end, a door stood ajar, light spilling out. Lady Havisham had followed us. Rupert was close behind, jaw clenched. And Sir Alistair came after them with Brackett and Reverend Vale. Miss Arden lingered at the doorway, and Miss Crane hovered like a frightened bird. Poirot pushed the door wider with the tips of his fingers. The guest chamber was neat to the point of impersonality. On the bed lay a man in his 40s, dressed for dinner but without his jacket, one arm flung out as though he had tried to rise. His face had the bluish pallor of sudden death. A decanter and glass stood on the bedside table. The glass was overturned, its contents staining the sheet. Brackett strode forward, touched the man's wrist, and straightened. "Dead! We must send for the constable." Poirot did not hurry to the body. He stood still, letting his eyes take in the room. Only then did he look down at the fallen glass. "Madame," he said softly to Lady Havisham. "Ah, you were expecting something buried. Tonight, someone has dug it up." Lady Havisham's mouth tightened. "That is Mr. Julian Arkwright, my brother's solicitor. He arrived this afternoon, unannounced. He said he had papers for me. Urgent." Rupert cut in too quickly. "He was perfectly well at tea. At dinner he begged off," Miss Crane added faintly. "A headache," he said. Poirot turned to her. "You found him?" She swallowed. "Lady Havisham asked me to take up a note. I knocked. No answer, so I opened the door." He crossed the room at last. He did not touch the dead man, but leaned close enough to see the faint stain at the corner of the mouth. His nostrils flared very slightly. Then he inspected the decanter, shifting only his head so the lamplight caught the liquid. Sir Alistair attempted a laugh. Cognac. Arkwright liked it.
The poor devil drank too much. Poirot's gaze lifted, mild and firm. Cognac loosens the tongue, monsieur. It does not so neatly still the heart. Brackett frowned. There's no sign of a struggle. No, Poirot agreed. There is the sign of order. Accidents are untidy. Here, things have been left. Composed. He pointed with a small motion. The rug corner is disturbed. A man rises suddenly when he is surprised. By a thought, a word, a knock. Rupert's eyes narrowed. Conjecture. Oui, but it leads to logic. Poirot turned to Lady Havisham. The papers. Where are they now? Lady Havisham hesitated. Always that brief pause. In the safe, she said. Then he never showed you, I said. He intended to, she replied, too smoothly. Poirot's politeness sharpened. Madame, when a man arrives with urgent papers and dies the same night,
At ease the papers become central. We will see them. Sir Alistair bristled. This is my house. And I respect it, Poirot said. That is why I will not allow your guests to be poisoned in it. Miss Arden gave a short, sharp laugh. So one of us murdered him. I say only, Poirot corrected, that someone in this house wanted Mr. Arkwright to stop speaking. At that, Miss Crane made a small sound, half gasp, half sob, and clutched her notebook to her chest. Her knuckles whitened. Poirot noticed, of course. He turned toward her with quiet gentleness. Mademoiselle Crane, what did Mr. Arkwright say to you this afternoon? I only took down a message, she stammered. He asked for Lady Havisham. He said, Tell her the secret is no longer safe. That is all. Lady Havisham swayed. Rupert caught her elbow. For an instant, his composure slipped.
Oh, and I saw fear, not for the dead man, but for what the dead man carried. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Ah, he murmured, so the secret walks again. A footman appeared, breathless. Beg pardon, sir, the telephone line is dead. We cannot reach the village. In the silence that followed, Poirot's gaze moved slowly from face to face, counting, weighing, arranging them like pieces on a board. Mes amis, he said quietly, then we are very conveniently alone, together. Brackett cleared his throat, trying to reclaim authority. If the line is cut, we must send a man on horseback. The roads are iced, Sir Alistair protested, and it is nearly midnight. Then we wait, said Poirot, and his tone made waiting sound like a decision, not a defeat. He turned to the footman. You will wake your chauffeur, but he will not leave. First, you will fetch candles, and you will place a servant at each stair. No one goes to the east wing alone. No one goes out of the front door. Lady Havisham found her voice again, thin as paper. You mean one of them is still here? Poirot's smile was small. Madame, the house has closed its circle for you. Until the police arrive, we shall keep it closed, with care, with order, and with my little grey cells. The candles were brought, their flames wavering in the draughty corridor, casting elongated shadows that seemed to whisper against the walls. Poirot insisted that the body remain untouched until the authorities could examine it, though he himself made a quiet circuit of the chamber once more, committing every detail to memory. Then, with a nod that signified both closure and commencement, he ushered us back toward the drawing-room. No one retires, he said calmly. Fatigue is an ally of confusion. We shall not allow confusion. The company reassembled below, though the easy civility of an hour earlier had dissolved into strained silence. Sir Alistair poured brandy with a hand less steady than he wished to display. Miss Arden stood at the hearth, arms folded, observing everyone with the cool detachment of a critic. Reverend Vale murmured a prayer under his breath. Rupert remained by the window, staring into the darkness beyond the frost-laced glass. Poirot positioned himself not in the centre, but slightly to one side, as though he were merely a courteous guest. Yet his presence anchored the room. "We begin with the simple things," he said. "At what hour did each of you last see Mr. Arkwright alive?" Sir Alistair answered first. 6:30, before dinner. We discussed a land valuation. And his manner? Perfectly normal. Miss Crane clasped her notebook. "I saw him at 7. He seemed distracted." "In what way, mademoiselle?" "He asked twice whether Lady Havisham had received his message, and he inquired if the east wing was secure." A flicker passed across Lady Havisham's face. "He had no business in the east wing?" "Ah," Poirot said gently, "but he thought he did." Rupert turned from the window. "This is absurd. Arkwright was melodramatic by nature. If he hinted at secrets, it was likely to increase his fee." "Yet he is dead," Poirot replied softly, "and melodrama has become fact." He continued around the circle. Miss Arden had not seen the solicitor since tea. Reverend Vale had exchanged a brief greeting after dinner, but noticed nothing unusual. Mrs. Irene declared she retired early with a headache. Lionel Brackett claimed to have been in the billiard-room alone. Poirot listened without interruption, only occasionally inclining his head. When all had spoken, he folded his hands. "You observe, mes amis, how harmonious the accounts are. Each of you alone, or nearly alone, at the critical hour." Brackett bristled. "You imply conspiracy?" "I imply opportunity." A log shifted in the hearth with a sudden crack, causing Miss Imogen to start visibly. Poirot's gaze flicked to her. "Mademoiselle, you are nervous." Of course I am," she stammered. "There is a dead man upstairs." "Oui, and yet your nervousness began when Mr. Arkwright's name was first spoken." She flushed scarlet and lowered her eyes. Rupert stepped forward slightly, protective. "This is intolerable," he said. My cousin is delicate. She need not endure interrogation." Poirot regarded him thoughtfully. "On the contrary, monsieur, delicacy is often most instructive." He shifted his attention back to Lady Havisham. "Madame, the papers. It is time." The room tightened. After a long pause, she crossed to the escritoire and withdrew a small key from a hidden compartment. Sir Alistair watched her, expression unreadable. Together they left for a moment, returning with a slim leather portfolio. Poirot accepted it with care, placing it on the table, but not yet opening it. "Before we examine its contents," he said, "we must consider something more elementary. The telephone line is cut. This indicates preparation. Monsieur Arkwright's death was not a sudden quarrel. It was anticipated." "Or opportunistic," Brackett countered. Poirot shook his head slightly. "Poison requires foresight. One does not carry it in the waistcoat pocket for amusement." Miss Arden's voice was cool. "You are certain it was poison?" "I am certain it was not kindness." He opened the portfolio at last. The rustle of paper sounded unnaturally loud. Inside lay several documents, bound with ribbon, and a sealed envelope addressed in Arkwright's precise hand. Lady Havisham's breathing grew shallow. Rupert's jaw tightened again, the muscle ticking at his temple. Poirot lifted the envelope but did not break the seal. Instead, he examined the handwriting. "It was written today," he murmured. "The ink is fresh. He intended this to be read. "Then read it," Sir Alistair snapped. "In a moment." He placed the envelope aside and leafed through the other papers. Deeds, correspondence, an old trust agreement. Poirot's eyes moved swiftly, absorbing. At last he looked up. "These concern the Havisham estate," he said quietly. "And a codicil to a will executed 20 years ago." Lady Havisham's composure faltered. "That will was settled long ago." "Settled," Poirot repeated. "Yes, but perhaps not satisfied." Rupert stepped closer. "What are you suggesting?" "That secrets are like debts," Poirot replied. "They accrue interest." The tension was palpable now, threading through the room like wire. Miss Crane's grip on her notebook trembled. Mrs. Wren avoided everyone's gaze. Reverend Vale's lips moved silently. Poirot finally broke the seal of the envelope. He read, and as he read, a subtle change came over his face, not shock, but confirmation. "Mr. Arkwright intended," he said slowly, "to disclose that the inheritance of Havisham Court rests upon a false declaration. A child's legitimacy was altered. A name was concealed." Silence crashed down heavier than any scream. Rupert went pale. "That is impossible." "Is it?" Poirot's eyes were very bright now. "The document asserts that the rightful heir was not the one presented to society." Sir Alistair swore under his breath. Lady Havisham closed her eyes briefly, as though an old wound had been touched. "And Mr. Arkwright threatened exposure," Poirot continued, "exposure that would alter not only fortune, but identity." Miss Imogen made a strangled sound. Poirot folded the letter carefully. "Mes amis, we are no longer dealing with abstract scandal. We are dealing with motive, profound, personal."
An immediate. A sudden thud echoed faintly from above, the unmistakable sound of a door closing in the east wing. Every head turned. Poirot did not raise his voice. "It appears," he said softly, "that someone wishes to ensure the past remains undisturbed." For a fraction of a second, no one moved. The thud from the east wing seemed to hang in the air, a dull punctuation mark at the end of Poirot's words. Then Sir Alistair sprang toward the door. "Someone's up there," he barked. "Precisely," said Poirot, already crossing the room with surprising agility. "And we shall not allow that someone to rearrange the past." We hurried once more to the staircase, the servants shrinking back as we passed. The candles guttered in the draught, throwing our shadows ahead of us like advancing spectres. At the landing, Poirot raised a hand.
"Oh, no one scatters," he instructed quietly. "If there is movement, we meet it together." The corridor of the east wing lay stretched before us, dim and hushed. The door to Mr. Arkwright's room remained as we had left it, closed but not locked. Yet farther along, near the small sitting room seldom used except in summer, another door stood ajar. A thin blade of light cut across the carpet. Rupert strode forward first, but Poirot's voice halted him. "Gently, monsieur. We do not wish to startle our archivist." Poirot reached the half-open door and pushed it wider. Miss Lillian Crane stood by the escritoire within, a taper in her trembling hand. The small fire in the grate had been newly stirred. Embers glowed brighter than before. On the desk lay a scatter of papers. She stared at us, stricken. I heard something," she stammered. I thought perhaps Mr. Arkwright had left. Something else." "At midnight?" Brackett demanded. Her composure cracked. I could not sleep. Poirot stepped inside, his gaze sweeping the room. The fire, the desk, the faint scent of singed paper lingering in the air. "You came to search," he said gently. "No." Her denial was too swift. "Then why is the grate disturbed?" Poirot knelt delicately, using the poker to draw forward a blackened fragment from the ash. Though charred at the edges, a line of ink remained visible. Rupert leaned over. "What does it say?" Poirot brushed away soot with his handkerchief. "Merely a date, 20 years ago." Lady Havisham swayed, catching the doorframe. Miss Crane pressed her hands together. "I was only trying to protect—" "Whom?" Poirot asked, without looking up. Silence answered him. Brackett folded his arms. This is obstruction, Miss Crane. You had no authority to tamper with evidence." Her chin lifted suddenly, desperation lending her courage. Authority? None of us had authority 20 years ago, yet decisions were made, papers signed, names altered. Poirot rose slowly, holding the charred fragment between finger and thumb. "So you knew of the codicil?" Her eyes darted to Lady Havisham. "I suspected," she whispered. "Mr. Arkwright once confided that there was a discrepancy in the estate records. He said he meant to set it right." "And that would endanger someone?" Poirot prompted softly. She did not answer, but her gaze flicked just once toward Rupert. The movement was slight, yet unmistakable. Rupert's face hardened. "This is grotesque. Are you implying that my position here is illegitimate?" Poirot's expression remained serene. I imply nothing. I observe." Sir Alistair stepped forward angrily. "My nephew's birth was properly registered." "Indeed," Poirot murmured. "Registrations may be altered, monsieur. Memory is more stubborn." He turned back to Miss Crane. "You burned only a fragment. Why stop?" "I heard footsteps," she said faintly. "I was afraid." "Of discovery," Brackett said. "Of truth," she replied, almost fiercely. The remark unsettled the room more than any accusation. Reverend Vale cleared his throat. "If there has been error in the past, perhaps it can be remedied without scandal." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "The dead man cannot be remedied." He walked to the desk and examined the remaining papers. They were old correspondence, letters between Sir Alistair and the late Mr. Havisham, references to a child born abroad, a prolonged absence from England, all the nurse dismissed abruptly. Poirot closed the folder. "Mes amis," he said quietly, "what we face is not merely the fear of lost fortune. It is the fear of lost identity. If Mr. Arkwright intended to prove that the heir of Havisham Court was not who society believed, then at least one among you stood to lose everything: name, inheritance, perhaps even affection." Miss Imogen uttered a soft cry. Rupert turned on her. "What do you know?" he demanded. "Nothing," she insisted, though tears shone in her eyes. Poirot intervened smoothly. "Emotion is the ally of the murderer, not of the innocent. Let us proceed with order." He addressed Miss Crane once more. "When you entered this room, was the door locked?" "No." "And the fire already lit?" "Yes." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "Then you were not the first visitor." A ripple passed through us all. Sir Alistair frowned. "You suggest someone came here after the death?" "Precisely. Perhaps to retrieve what Mr. Arkwright sought." "And found?" Brackett pressed. "That," said Poirot, "is the question." He crossed to the window and examined the frost along the sill. One pane bore the faint smear of a gloved hand. "The night is cold," he murmured. "Yet someone opened this window recently." Rupert stiffened. "Impossible. The drop to the terrace is 20 feet. Poirot smiled faintly. "Not impossible, merely uncomfortable." He turned back to us, eyes luminous in the candlelight. "First, Mr. Arkwright arrives with proof of a concealed birth. Second, he dies before revealing it. Third, someone attempts to destroy corroborating papers. Fourth, a window is opened, suggesting either escape or entrance. He let the sequence settle, each point clicking into place like a gear. Therefore, he concluded softly, the secret no one meant to keep has already begun to move of its own accord. From the corridor came the sudden, unmistakable sound of hurried footsteps, retreating toward the far end of the east wing. Poirot's gaze sharpened. "It seems," he said very quietly, "that our circle is not yet complete." Poirot was already in the corridor, before the last echo of those retreating footsteps had faded. Rupert followed at once, his long strides carrying him swiftly toward the bend at the far end of the east wing. The rest of us came behind in a confused cluster, candlelight shuddering along the walls. At the corner, the passage divided, one branch toward the unused schoolroom and attic stairs, the other toward a narrow service staircase leading down to the rear hall. But the air still quivered with recent movement. "Which way?" Brackett demanded. Poirot did not answer immediately. He crouched, his immaculate trousers disregarded, and examined the runner. A faint disturbance marked the pile near the service stair, pressed fibres where a foot had pivoted sharply. "This direction," he said calmly. Rupert was already descending when Poirot caught his sleeve lightly. "Not with such haste, monsieur. Panic tramples evidence." They proceeded more carefully. The service stair was steep and uncarpeted. Midway down, Poirot paused again. On the banister rail, just where a hand might grasp in urgency, a smear interrupted the polish. He leaned closer. "Ash," he murmured. Miss Crane, who had been brought reluctantly along, gave a strangled sound. At the foot of the stairs, the rear hall lay dim and empty, and the outer door was closed, bolted from within. No servant lingered. Poirot had ordered them to remain at their posts. The silence was absolute. "So," Sir Alistair said sharply, "no intruder escaped this way." "Or none needed to," Poirot replied. He turned instead toward the small cloakroom adjoining the hall. Its door stood slightly ajar. Rupert pushed it open. Inside, by the narrow washstand, stood Mrs. Priscilla Wren. She started violently at the sight of us. A shawl was thrown hastily about her shoulders. Her hair, usually neat, had come loose at the temples. In her hand she clutched a pair of gloves, one of which bore a faint grey smudge across the fingertips. "What is the meaning of this?" Sir Alistair demanded. Mrs. Wren's composure flickered, then reassembled itself. "I heard footsteps," she said coolly, "and I feared someone might be ill." "In the cloakroom?" Brackett asked dryly. Her gaze shifted, calculating. "I felt faint. I came for water." Poirot stepped forward, his eyes resting briefly on the gloves. "Mademoiselle Wren, you retired early with a headache." "Yes." "And yet you are dressed." "I could not sleep." The explanation echoed Miss Crane's earlier plea. Poirot's moustaches twitched almost imperceptibly. "Permit me," he said gently, extending his hand. She hesitated a fraction too long before surrendering the gloves. Poirot examined the smear. "Interesting," he murmured. "Not merely ash. There is also a trace of sealing wax." Lady Havisham drew a sharp breath. Mrs. Wren's chin lifted. "I have done nothing improper." "No?" Poirot regarded her steadily. "You have perhaps opened a letter." Brackett looked from one to the other. "So what letter?" "The envelope Mr. Arkwright intended for Lady Havisham," Poirot replied evenly. "It was sealed with red wax. When I broke it, the seal fell intact. Yet there was a faint residue on the flap, as though another hand had touched it first." All eyes turned to Mrs. Wren. "You are mistaken," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Poirot's tone remained mild. You are companion to Lady Havisham. You have served her faithfully for many years. 20 years, perhaps? A pause. Yes. Then you were present when the child in question was born. The words struck like a thrown stone. Rupert stiffened. Miss Imogen pressed her hands to her mouth. Mrs. Wren's expression changed, less defiant now, more weary. I was present, she said quietly. And you knew the truth of that birth. Sir Alister swore again. Lady Priscilla. She faced him squarely. I did what was asked of me. Asked by whom? Poirot inquired. Her silence was answer enough. Lady Havisham spoke at last, her voice thin but steady. It was I. My sister died in disgrace abroad. The child, her child, would have ruined us. We claimed him as our own. Rupert stared at her, the colour draining from his face. You mean... Poirot intervened softly. You were raised as the heir, monsieur, yet legally perhaps you were not. The revelation seemed to hollow the air itself. Rupert swayed slightly as though the floor had shifted beneath him. Mrs. Wren clasped her hands. Mr. Arkwright threatened exposure. He said he would correct the record. And you feared for Lady Havisham, Poirot said. I feared scandal, she replied fiercely. I feared the destruction of everything we built. Brackett's voice cut in. Fear is not proof of murder. No, Poirot agreed. But it is motive. He handed the gloves back to Mrs. Wren. You followed Miss Crane to the East Wing after hearing the commotion. You sought any remaining documents Mr. Arkwright might have hidden. In your haste, you brushed the ashes. She did not deny it. But, Poirot continued thoughtfully, you did not poison him. All eyes swung back to him. You had loyalty, yes, but not the temperament. Poison is intimate. It requires resolve and proximity at the right moment. Rupert found his voice, hoarse. Then who? Poirot's gaze drifted past them toward the rear door. The window in the East Wing was opened, he said slowly. Yet no one left by this stair, while therefore the opening was symbolic or deceptive. Deceptive, Hastings myself asked. To suggest an intruder, Poirot replied, when in truth the enemy was already within. A faint sound reached us then, not hurried footsteps this time, but the soft scrape of something dragged across wood. It came from above. Poirot's eyes sharpened once more. Mes amis, he said quietly, someone remains very busy in Mr. Arkwright's room. Poirot did not wait for further conjecture. With a swift inclination of his head, he led the way back up the service stair, his step surprisingly light. The rest of us followed in tense silence, each ascent of the creaking wood magnifying the faint scraping sound above. At the top landing, the corridor lay dim once more, the candles guttering low in their sconces. The door to Mr. Arkwright's room, on which had been left closed, now stood unmistakably open. Rupert drew a sharp breath. Someone is inside. Poirot raised a hand for quiet and moved forward. The chamber appeared at first unchanged. The body remained upon the bed, rigid and accusatory in the lamplight. The overturned glass had not shifted. Yet near the wardrobe a chair had been drawn from its place against the wall. Its legs had left fresh tracks in the carpet's nap, the source of the sound we had heard. And kneeling beside the open wardrobe, her back to us, was Miss Celeste Arden. She turned slowly at the intrusion, her expression not startled, but faintly irritated, as though interrupted at a sketch. "Well," she said coolly, "this is theatrical." Sir Alister strode forward. "What are you doing?" "Observing," she replied. I find death instructive." "Instructive?" Brackett echoed sharply. Miss Arden rose, brushing dust from her dark skirt. You all stare at the bed. I prefer the margins. Poirot's gaze had already dropped to the wardrobe interior. Several garments hung neatly, but the lower shelf had been disturbed. A small leather case lay open upon the floor. "You have opened Mr. Arkwright's luggage?" Poirot said. "Yes." Her chin lifted slightly. "Since none of you thought to do so." Rupert stepped toward her angrily. "You had no right." She met his glare evenly. "Nor did whoever opened that window." The remark caused a perceptible stir. Poirot knelt by the leather case. Inside were papers, carefully folded. One sheet lay separate, its edges slightly crumpled. He picked it up. "Ah," he murmured. Miss Arden watched him with narrowed eyes. "You see it?"
Then? Indeed, Brackett hovered. What is it? A copy, Poirot replied, of the corrected birth record. A collective intake of breath circled the room. Rupert's face went ashen. You mean, Poirot said gently, that Mr. Arkwright did not rely upon a single document. He anticipated resistance. Miss Arden folded her arms. So the great secret was already beyond your reach. Not entirely, Poirot corrected, but its suppression would require more than burning a page in the grate. He examined the paper closely. This copy was not sealed. It was accessible. Sir Alistair's voice was rough. Then why did Arkwright not present it at once? Poirot glanced toward the bed. Because he wished to control the moment of revelation. He intended to confront, perhaps to negotiate. Blackmail, Brackett suggested bluntly. Possibly, Poirot conceded. Or restitution. Miss Arden gave a short laugh. Men seldom risk social annihilation out of altruism. Poirot rose, holding the document carefully. Mademoiselle, you are perceptive. Tell me, when did you come here? Just now. No, when first? Her eyes flickered, but she held his gaze. After dinner, I wondered. The East Wing intrigued me. And you encountered Mr. Arkwright? She hesitated only a heartbeat. Yes. Alive? Yes. What passed between you? Miss Arden's composure shifted, not to fear, but to calculation. He asked whether I believed truth was worth discomfort. I told him discomfort is the only honest condition. Poirot's moustaches twitched. And did he confide his intention? He implied he possessed something explosive. Rupert stepped forward. Or you knew. I suspected, she corrected coolly. I have little patience for inherited lies. The accusation hung pointedly. Poirot's tone remained mild. You are not family, mademoiselle? Yet you appear invested. She met his gaze squarely. Imogen is, my friend. Miss Imogen, standing near the door, looked up in startled distress. Poirot observed the exchange with keen interest. And you felt she was wronged? Miss Arden did not answer directly. I dislike injustice, even if correcting it destroys those around you. She shrugged faintly. Destruction is sometimes cleansing. The remark drew an audible intake of breath from Lady Havisham. Poirot walked slowly toward the bed, studying the dead man's face once more. Mr. Arkwright spoke to you after dinner, he said thoughtfully. And yet by 7:30 he was dead. Miss Arden's jaw tightened. I left him alive. Alone? Yes, certain, she faltered. I heard someone in the corridor. Who? I could not see. Poirot's eyes shifted to Rupert, then to Sir Alistair, then to Mrs. Wren. Each face bore its own tension, its own private reckoning. He turned back to the open wardrobe. One more question, mademoiselle. Why search his case? She did not hesitate this time. Because if he had proof, I wished to know it. For what purpose? To decide whether to expose it myself. The frankness stunned the room. Brackett stared at her. You admit intent to scandalize this family? I admit intent to reveal truth. Poirot regarded her steadily. Yet you did not poison him. She gave a sharp, incredulous laugh. Certainly not. No, Poirot said softly. You prefer dramatic revelations. Poison is too subtle. He folded the document carefully and slipped it into his pocket. Mes amis, we now possess confirmation of motive, evidence of concealment, and proof that the secret could not be contained by a single death. His gaze moved deliberately from one to another. But we are still missing the essential element. And that is? Rupert demanded. Poirot's eyes rested upon the decanter on the bedside table. The moment, he said quietly, when Mr. Arkwright raised his glass and trusted the wrong hand. Poirot moved toward the bedside table and regarded the decanter with renewed interest. The amber liquid caught the lamplight innocently enough, yet its stillness now seemed almost deliberate. Tell me, he said without turning, who poured the cognac? There was a brief silence.
But Sir Alistair answered first. It was left here earlier. The footman brought it before dinner. Which footman? Peter's, I believe. Poirot inclined his head. And after dinner? Did anyone attend Mr. Arkwright? Miss Crane spoke faintly. He requested no service. Rupert crossed his arms tightly. He dismissed us all. Not quite all, Poirot murmured. He lifted the glass carefully with his handkerchief and examined the rim. There are two distinct impressions here, he said quietly. One firm, one lighter. Brackett frowned. Meaning? Meaning the glass was handled more than once after it was filled. Miss Arden leaned against the wardrobe. That proves nothing. It proves interaction, Poirot replied. Poison does not introduce itself. He set the glass down again with precision. We reconstruct the evening. Mr. Arkwright dines lightly, complains of headache, retires. At some point after, he is visited. Words are exchanged. A glass is raised. Shortly thereafter, he dies. Reverend Vale shifted uneasily. You assume the poison was administered in that glass? Poirot smiled faintly. I assume nothing. I observe sequence. He turned suddenly toward Miss Imogen. Mademoiselle, you have been silent. When last did you see Mr. Arkwright? She startled under the attention. I passed him in the corridor after dinner. He asked if I would walk tomorrow morning. And you refused? Yes. Why? She flushed. Because I felt uncomfortable. Uncomfortable with him or with what he represented. Her lips trembled. He looked at me as though he knew something. Poirot's gaze softened. And did he? She hesitated, then whispered, He told me once that blood tells its own story. Rupert stiffened again. Imogen, stop. Poirot's eyes flicked between them. Ah, so Mr. Arkwright hinted not only to Lady Havisham, but also to you. Miss Imogen's distress deepened. I never believed him. But you feared he might be right, Poirot said gently. The tension in the room thickened perceptibly. Sir Alistair broke in. This is intolerable. You are turning family against family. No, Poirot replied calmly. The secret has done that already. He moved to the small writing desk near the window and examined the blotter. Mr. Arkwright was writing earlier, he observed. There is a faint impression. He angled the blotter toward the light, then drew from his pocket a pencil and lightly shaded across the surface. Gradually, words emerged from the pressure marks beneath. Hastings, I confess, felt a chill. The partial sentence became visible. If anything should happen to me, look to the one who... The remainder was incomplete. Brackett exhaled sharply. That suggests foreknowledge. Or caution, Poirot said. Mr. Arkwright anticipated resistance. He straightened slowly. There is something else. He crossed to the decanter again and lifted it, holding it against the lamplight. Notice the level. A small quantity is missing. Natural, Sir Alistair said impatiently. He drank? Possibly, Poirot agreed, but the missing measure corresponds precisely to a single glass. Rupert frowned. What of it? It suggests the poison was introduced into the glass, not the decanter. Miss Arden tilted her head. Then anyone could have done so. Anyone? Poirot repeated softly. Who approached him at the correct moment. His gaze settled, not on Rupert or Lady Havisham this time, but on Reverend Vale. The clergyman stiffened. Surely you cannot. You were seen in the corridor after dinner, Poirot said mildly. Miss Arden heard someone. Reverend Vale adjusted his spectacles. I sought counsel with Mr. Arkwright. On spiritual matters? A pause. On matters of conscience, he admitted. And what troubled your conscience, Monsieur le Pasteur? Vale's voice dropped. The injustice of the estate. I learned the truth some months ago. A stir ran through the room. Poirot's eyes gleamed. How? Through parish records, Vale said reluctantly. There were discrepancies. I confronted Mr. Arkwright privately. And tonight? I urged him to delay exposure.
I feared scandal would wound more than it healed. And did he agree? No, he was resolute. Poirot nodded slowly. And you left him alive? Yes. Did you touch the glass? No. The denial came too swiftly. Poirot did not press. Instead, he walked thoughtfully back toward the bed. Observe, he said quietly. Each of you possessed motive, fear of disgrace, fear of loss, fear of upheaval. But motive alone does not kill. There must also be opportunity and temperament. He turned to Mrs. Wren. You are loyal. To Miss Arden. You are revolutionary. To Reverend Vale. You are conflicted. To Rupert. You are threatened. To Lady Havisham. You are desperate. His gaze rested on Sir Alistair last. And you, monsieur, are proud. Sir Alistair's face darkened. Poirot folded his hands once more. Pride, he said softly. He is a dangerous ally when truth approaches. A faint sound interrupted him then, the crackle of something shifting in the fireplace. All eyes turned. From within the grate, beneath the remaining embers, a small flare ignited suddenly, as though something treated with oil had caught late. Poirot stepped forward swiftly and with the poker drew out a partially burned scrap that had escaped earlier notice. Though charred at the edges, one line remained legible. The child was not hers. Silence descended like a curtain. Poirot's eyes lifted slowly from the scrap to Sir Alistair's face. Ah, he said very quietly, now we approach the heart. Sir Alistair did not speak at once. The colour had drained from his broad face, leaving the lines about his mouth stark and rigid.
In the burned scrap trembled slightly in Poirot's fingers as the last ember died into ash. The child was not hers, Brackett repeated slowly. Then whose? Lady Havisham closed her eyes. Enough, she whispered. No, madame, Poirot said gently. It is not enough. It is precisely insufficient. We require the whole truth. Rupert's voice was strained. You are suggesting my mother? I suggest nothing, Poirot interrupted softly. I assemble. He turned to Sir Alistair. 20 years ago your sister-in-law died abroad. A child existed. Society believed that child to be the natural heir presented here at Havisham Court. Yet this fragment indicates substitution. Sir Alistair's jaw tightened. You build castles from cinders. No, said Poirot quietly. I build from sequence. He walked slowly across the room. I drawing the others with him as though by invisible thread. Mr. Arkwright discovers irregularity in the estate records. He confronts you, perhaps privately. He hints to others. He prepares documents. He writes, if anything should happen to me. He anticipates danger. Why? Because the truth he uncovered was not merely scandalous, it was catastrophic. Miss Imogen swayed where she stood. Miss Arden moved subtly nearer to her, a protective instinct evident despite her earlier coolness. Catastrophic how? Brackett demanded. Poirot stopped before Sir Alistair. Because, monsieur, the substitution was not made to protect your late sister-in-law's child. It was made to protect you. A stunned silence fell. Sir Alistair's eyes blazed. That is monstrous. Is it? Poirot's tone remained almost conversational. Or could the burned line states the child was not hers? If the child presented as heir was not the sister's, then whose child was he? No one breathed. Poirot answered his own question. He was yours. Lady Havisham made a broken sound. Rupert stared as though struck. You mean? Yes, Poirot said softly. You were born not of the disgraced sister, but of Sir Alistair himself, by another woman. Sir Alistair lunged forward. I will not endure this slander. Poirot did not retreat. The parish records Reverend Vale consulted would show a birth abroad on the correct date, yet the mother's name altered. The original child, the sister's child, must have died, conveniently, and a second infant, yours, was presented in his place to preserve inheritance and reputation. Mrs. Wren covered her face with her hands. You knew, Poirot said quietly to her. Yet her shoulders shook once. I obeyed, she whispered. Rupert's voice was hollow. Then I am... You are legitimate in laws arranged, Poirot replied gently, but not in origin as believed. Miss Imogen spoke through tears. Then the true heir? Died in infancy, Lady Havisham said faintly. The child was frail. We feared exposure. Alistair insisted the estate must not pass outside the line. Sir Alistair's composure cracked at last. It was necessity, he thundered. The estate would have been lost, divided, destroyed. I preserved it. You preserved yourself, Poirot corrected softly. The silence that followed was different now, less confusion, more dreadful clarity. Brackett cleared his throat. Even if this grotesque tale were accurate, it explains motive. It does not prove murder. Ah, Poirot said, and then at last there was steel beneath the silk. But it does. He turned to the bedside table once more. Consider. Mr. Arkwright intended disclosure. He possessed copies. He hinted broadly. Exposure would not merely alter Rupert's status. It would expose bigamy, fraud, falsification of records, crimes punishable even now. Sir Alistair's breathing had grown shallow. You visited him after dinner, Poirot continued quietly. Miss Arden heard footsteps. You sought to negotiate. He refused. Sir Alistair said nothing. You are proud, monsieur. You would not beg, nor would you allow your life's construction to crumble. Rupert stepped back slowly, horror dawning. Uncle? Poirot lifted the glass again with his handkerchief. There are two impressions, one lighter, one firm. The lighter belongs to Mr. Arkwright. The firmer, to a larger hand. Sir Alistair's hands were large indeed. You poured from the decanter, perhaps to steady the conversation. You added the poison beforehand, carried not in your waistcoat, but retrieved from your own medicine chest. You suffer from gout, do you not? Sir Alistair flinched. The tincture you use contains a preparation, harmless in small quantity, fatal in greater measure. Mixed into cognac, it leaves little trace. Reverend Vale whispered, Dear God! You remained, Poirot continued, until he drank. You watched. When he faltered, you arranged the scene to suggest solitude. Later, fearing further documents, you returned to search the room, opening the window to imply intrusion. Mrs. Wren gasped. "You told me nothing." "I suspected nothing," Poirot replied, "until pride betrayed itself." Sir Alister's face had become a mask. "And the scrap?" Brackett pressed. "You burned correspondence confirming the substitution," Poirot said calmly. "But haste leaves fragments." At last Sir Alister spoke, his voice low and harsh. "He would have ruined us. He would have revealed you," Poirot corrected. A terrible stillness filled the room. Rupert's voice trembled. "Is it true?" Sir Alister looked at him, really looked, for the first time that night. Something like regret flickered there. "I did it for the estate," he said. "For yourself," Poirot replied softly. Footsteps sounded on the stair, firm, official. The constable at last had arrived, summoned by a servant who had ridden through the frost. Poirot stepped aside. "Sir Alister Havisham," he said quietly, "Tinya's secret was never meant to remain buried, but it was murder, not truth, that has undone you." The constable entered the chamber with the cautious gravity of a man aware he had stepped into more than an ordinary death. Behind him came the village surgeon, red-cheeked from the cold, his bag clutched tightly in hand. The atmosphere shifted at once from private reckoning to official consequence. Sir Alister did not resist when the constable approached. He stood very straight, the remnants of his pride clinging to him like a uniform. Only his eyes betrayed the strain, a flicker of calculation giving way, at last, to inevitability. "I deny nothing," he said, before being asked. "But I will not be paraded like a common criminal." The constable cleared his throat respectfully. "Sir, I must request you accompany me." Lady Havisham swayed again, and this time Rupert caught her firmly. Her gaze followed her husband as though she were watching the slow dismantling of her entire life. "Alister," she whispered. He did not look back. The surgeon bent over Mr. Arkwright's body, examining with brisk efficiency. Poirot remained silent, hands folded, allowing the machinery of law to begin its methodical turn. Reverend Vale murmured something about confession and repentance, but Sir Alister gave no sign he heard. When at last he was led from the room, the sound of his measured steps receded down the corridor, then the stair, then into the cold night beyond. The house seemed to exhale. For a long moment no one spoke. Rupert stood motionless, his face drained of the easy confidence it had worn upon our arrival. When Miss Imogen moved closer to him, hesitating before placing a hand lightly on his arm, he did not withdraw. "It was all a lie," he said quietly. Poirot turned to him with unexpected gentleness. "Non, monsieur, not all. You were raised here. You were loved, perhaps imperfectly, but sincerely. Blood is not the sole architect of belonging." Rupert gave a bitter half-smile. "That sounds charitable." "It is logical," Poirot replied. "The past cannot be unwritten, but the future remains editable." Miss Arden, who had watched the proceedings with uncharacteristic stillness, spoke at last. "Will the truth be made public?" Brackett, assuming again the posture of authority, answered gravely, "It will be a matter for the courts." Lady Havisham sank into a chair, her composure finally dissolving into quiet tears. Mrs. Wren knelt beside her, clasping her hands in shared sorrow. "I thought secrecy would protect us," Lady Havisham murmured. "Instead, it has destroyed everything." Poirot regarded her thoughtfully. "Secrets rarely remain static, madame. They exert pressure. And when pressure is applied too long, something fractures." The surgeon straightened from his examination. "Poison," he confirmed shortly. Administered in liquid form, swift action. Brackett nodded. We shall need statements from all present. Poirot inclined his head. You shall have them. The formalities began then, names recorded, times recounted, movements clarified. The narrative of the evening, once tangled and charged with suspicion, now aligned with sober coherence. Sir Alistair's visit to the chamber was acknowledged, Mrs. Wren's late search explained, Miss Arden's curiosity contextualized. The circle, once oppressive, had opened. At last the east wing emptied. The body was removed discreetly. Candles burned low, their wax pooling like the residue of tension finally spent. Near dawn, Poirot and I stood in the great hall, preparing to depart. Frost silvered the windows once more, though the air felt strangely lighter. Rupert approached us. His expression was sober but steadier now. Monsieur Poirot, he said quietly, what becomes of me? Poirot studied him for a moment. That depends, he replied, upon what you choose to preserve. An estate is land and stone. A character is choice. Rupert absorbed this in silence. And the name? He asked after a moment. Names, said Poirot softly, are often the smallest part of identity. Miss Imogen joined him, her earlier timidity replaced by a fragile resolve. But Miss Arden lingered behind them, watchful but less combative than before. Lady Havisham did not come down to bid farewell. Mrs. Wren sent word of gratitude, thin comfort against the weight of consequence. As we stepped out into the pale morning, the cold air struck clean and sharp. The river beyond the lawn moved steadily, indifferent to inheritance or disgrace. Hastings, I confess, I felt a heaviness linger. It is a melancholy business, I said. Poirot adjusted his gloves with meticulous care. Melancholy, yes, he agreed, but also instructive. Instructive in what way? He glanced back once at the stately facade of Havisham Court. In the way that truth behaves, he said. It does not disappear simply because it is inconvenient. It waits, it accumulates allies, and eventually, it insists. I considered Sir Alistair's proud figure led into the night, the burned fragments in the grate, the poisoned glass raised in fatal confidence. And Mr. Arkwright? I asked. He underestimated pride, Poirot replied, and overestimated negotiation. We walked toward the motor car as the first light of sunrise crested the horizon. The affair at Havisham Court, I began thoughtfully, was never merely about inheritance. Poirot's moustaches curved faintly upward. No, mon ami. It was about a secret no one meant to keep, yet everyone conspired to protect. He paused, then added with quiet precision, and in protecting it, they ensured it would one day demand its price. Morning settled fully over Havisham Court by the time Hercule Poirot requested that the remaining members of the household gather once more in the drawing-room. The constable had departed with Sir Alistair before dawn, and the formal machinery of justice had begun its slow advance. Yet Poirot, with characteristic precision, was not content to leave the matter resting solely upon confession and circumstance. "Mes amis," he said quietly, once they were assembled, "justice in the courts is one thing, justice in the mind is another. Before Captain Hastings and I depart, there is clarity still required." Lady Havisham sat pale but composed, Mrs. Wren beside her. Rupert stood near the mantel, straighter now as though some inner recalibration had begun. Could Miss Imogen and Miss Arden sat together, their early attention replaced by sober solidarity. Reverend Vale and Mr. Brackett observed in attentive silence. Poirot folded his hands. Sir Alistair confessed to administering the poison, he began, but confession, particularly when pride is wounded, may conceal as much as it reveals. A faint stir ran through the room. "You doubt him?" Brackett asked. "I doubt nothing," Poirot replied. "I examine." He turned to Rupert. "When your uncle visited Mr. Arkwright after dinner, he intended to negotiate. That much is clear. But consider this. The poison introduced into the glass acted swiftly. Yet the level in the decanter remained consistent with only a single measure poured." "Yes," Rupert said cautiously. "Sir Alistair suffered from gout. His medicinal tincture was indeed capable of harm in excess. However, that tincture leaves a distinct bitterness, detectable even in strong spirits." Reverend Vale frowned. "The surgeon mentioned no such taste." "Precisely," Poirot said softly. A slow realization began to dawn. "You mean," Miss Arden said carefully, "that Sir Alistair did not use his medicine?" "Correct." Lady Havisham gripped her handkerchief. "Then how—" Poirot walked to the small writing desk and lifted a slim silver paper knife. "Poison may be carried in many forms," he said. "Powder, liquid, even upon an object." He looked directly at Mrs. Wren. "You followed Sir Alistair to the East Wing, did you not?" Her face drained of colour. "You feared he would fail," Poirot continued gently. "You feared that negotiation would not silence Mr. Arkwright. You had served this family for 20 years. You knew the fragility of its foundations." Mrs. Wren's lips trembled. "I only meant to listen." "You entered after Sir Alistair left," Poirot said. Mr. Arkwright, unsettled but alive, poured himself another small measure. "You approached with concern. You touched the rim of his glass, ostensibly to steady it." "No," she whispered. "In your glove," Poirot said softly, "was a fine residue, ash mixed with powdered extract. Not Sir Alistair's tincture, something far subtler. You had prepared it earlier when the letter's seal stained your fingers. You anticipated this possibility." Lady Havisham stared at her companion in disbelief. "I would never," she began, "allow scandal to destroy her," Poirot finished. "You acted not from pride, like Sir Alistair."
"It's but from devotion." Tears streamed silently down Mrs. Wren's face. "He meant to ruin her," she said brokenly. "To drag her through public disgrace." Sir Alistair hesitated. He always hesitated when it came to consequence. "I did not." Rupert took a step backward, stunned. "You poisoned him?" he breathed. "I spared your aunt humiliation," Mrs. Wren replied, though her voice lacked conviction now. "I preserved this house." "No," Poirot said quietly. "You preserved the illusion." The room seemed to shrink inward. Sir Alistair's confession, Poirot explained, had been an act of assumption, perhaps even sacrifice. Confronted with exposure and overwhelmed by pride, he had believed himself responsible, never suspecting that his loyal accomplice had acted independently after he departed.
He arranged the window to suggest intrusion," Poirot continued. "He burned fragments in panic, but the actual fatal act occurred moments later, by another hand." Reverend Vale bowed his head. "Two sins born of one secret." Mrs. Wren sank into a chair, her strength dissolving. "I loved her," she whispered toward Lady Havisham. "I thought love justified anything." Lady Havisham's expression shifted from shock to terrible comprehension. "Priscilla, you should have trusted me." "I trusted only fear," Mrs. Wren said. The silence that followed was heavy, yet strangely cleansing. Brackett spoke at last. "The constable must be informed." "Yes," Poirot agreed. "Truth, once begun, must proceed without pause." Rupert straightened slowly. The devastation in his features had transformed into something steadier. If this house is to endure," he said quietly, "it must endure honestly." Miss Imogen's hand found his, once more, this time without hesitation. Poirot regarded them with measured approval. "Identity," he said softly, "is not secured by concealment. It is secured by courage." Outside, the winter light strengthened, illuminating the room not harshly, but clearly. When at last the constable was summoned again, and Mrs. Wren rose to meet her consequence, she did so without resistance. Her final glance toward Lady Havisham was not pleading, but apologetic. As the door closed behind her, a profound stillness settled over Havisham Court, no longer the suffocating silence of secrecy, but the tentative quiet of reckoning. Hastings broke it first. "It is a tragic affair," I said. Poirot adjusted his cuffs with habitual exactness. "Tragic? Well, yes," he replied, "but inevitable." He turned once more toward the gathering. "The secret no one meant to keep has been relinquished," he said, "not by force but by consequence, and that, mes amis, is often the only true resolution." With that, Hercule Poirot inclined his head and prepared to depart, leaving behind not merely a solved crime, but a house finally stripped of its illusion.